friends with airplanes at different times. I'm really glad to be here. Sometimes it was kind of close. And I don't know, you may have some experience with some of that, but I am glad to be here, and be here because also I'm a lifetime member of our Arkansas Air and Military Museum up in Fayetteville. We were lucky enough to have the Air National Guard give us a C-130. It's an H model. I flew A's and B's and E's and DC-130, but it's about the same. So I get to go to the museum and play in my airplane. It's my big toy. But I get to do that with all, well, I will say kids of all ages. And trust me, it's a neat thing. We get lots and lots of, 60 or 80 or one day 190 school students coming in and running them in the airplane, up in the cockpit, back down, to see the whole museum. We've got 3 buildings at the airport, so we have the access to the airfield itself, and so we frequently can do things, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But before I do that, I have something for you, if you would like to come up here for a brief moment.
Sure.
This is a kitchen magnet.
Oh, cute.
And it shows something about D-Day, and this being the 80th anniversary of that, it shows a bunch of paratroopers inside a C-47 getting ready to go do their thing, which is an interesting thing to go along with that.
Thank you, Dave.
Well, just a minute, don't run off.
off.
I've heard that people drink here in Texas, beer on occasion, so I thought this might be a nice idea. It's got the outline of a soldier, D-Day, June 6, 1944, and you look through it and you see the soldiers.
I'm probably going to use it for my Dr. Pepper, if that's all right.
Well, that would work, but...
Oh, did you bring me a beer? Oh, he brought me a diet Dr. Pepper. You know what I like.
I'm a trained professional.
That's exactly what I thank you, Dave.
Yeah. She told me that that's the the state drink here is Dr. Pepper. So anyhow, the occasion of D-Day is significant for me because I flew C-130s, and I did airdrops in Vietnam, which was not always a healthy thing to do, but we did the best we could and did amazingly well in the success of the airdrops. How many of you have heard of the Eastertide Offensive? Okay, you can find it, it's on the internet, but the Eastertide Offensive occurred in the spring of 1972. And that's where the North Vietnamese decided they were going to do the same thing as they did in 1968. And so they were coming down the highway and heading for Saigon. And there was quite a bit of resistance to that. So we were airdropping food, medical supplies, ammunition to the good guys. That was important to get that information, those products to them, because they were running out of options. A little place called An Loc in Vietnam. The good guys were in a soccer stadium, and we were airdropping into the soccer stadium. And we had developed a new system that was better than the first 4 months of that year because they'd shot down 4 of our C-130s, all 4 complete losses. There were 3 of the Vietnamese aircraft that were also trying to do that. They were shot down. And we came in doing the airdrops from a higher altitude with reasonably very good precision. Very little of it, we were about 95 to 97% effective in what we were doing. Occasionally the winds would change a bit, but it was an interesting time. But when I see out there, you go to an air show now and then, and you'll see a C-47, right? Anybody seen one there? This is your basic C-47. This is incidentally the very first type airplane in the Air Force inventory. When I came into it, I got to fly it. I got up there and I got to fly it and see what it was like, and it was just an orientation ride, but we flew all the way from Cheyenne, Wyoming to Travis Air Force Base out in California. Now, does anybody know why we have these stripes on there?
Invasion stripes, identification.
Okay, invasion stripes, right? Now, the problem that we had, not so much that day because we did it, but when we invaded Italy, coming off of North Africa, we were going to do an airdrop, which we did, but the problem was the Germans, the twin-engine bombers that the Germans had looked kind of similar to these, and a bunch of our own airplanes were shot down by the Navy because they couldn't see the difference. And so any airplane that was our airplane, in other words, an Allied airplane on D-Day, had these fancy stripes. So we didn't shoot them down. That made a big difference. But with that idea in mind, you answered the question correctly, and because of that, on ice, you've got a Dove dark chocolate.
Oh, okay. Wonderful,
Now,
thank you.
there's a hidden message on the inside of the wrapper, and certainly, you know, I wouldn't recommend leaving it in your pocket until the 4th of July.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
Now, one thing that I have done since, well, let's see, started about 7 years ago, and I was motivated by an aviation-related person. His first name was Gale. If anybody knows the answer to this, raise your hand. Okay. His last name was Halverson. Okay. He was in the Air Force.
As a bomber pilot.
Uh,
Is it from the Masters and Commanders? Have y'all seen that series?
well,
Gale?
not quite.
Yeah. That's all I know. I know
Yeah.
him from that.
You know, the basic concept, he was, yeah, a major, eventually made lieutenant colonel and going, but he was known as the candy bomber. Anybody, does that ring a bell?
Yep.
Okay. What did he do?
Drop candy.
What kind?
Hershey.
See, he's got the idea. He saw him getting some chocolate,
Yeah,
and
and I drove.
as we go along here tonight, if you think you know the answer to a question, certainly I'll make it worth your while. Now, what he did, they would all night long before their missions going into Berlin, they went down to the base exchange and they bought boxes and boxes of Hershey bars. And then they bought handkerchiefs and string, and they made many, many, many parachutes with chocolate. So on final approach, going into landing in Berlin, they would take the boxes and dump them out the back of the airplane. The kids figured it out pretty quick, and they just called him the candy bomber. I took that idea and decided I want to do the same thing. My wife passed away 4.5 years ago, so I was working with her, caregiving with her for a lot of years. And I noticed that when I went to a hospital to take her for one thing or the other, that if I brought dark chocolate and gave it to the medical staff, they smiled, they liked it, and they came back more often, which I thought was kind of a nice idea. So I started doing that. Then I got a little more professional. On the back of my business card, I've got a C-130 on one side. I've got a couple like this. Anyhow, it says MOCA. And that MOCA is, you know, you got to have an acronym, right? That's Ministry of Chocolate, Hearts, Hugs, and Angels. Okay? So I started up my own ministry, and since I started it, I get to be the Pope. Okay? I didn't want to mess with the priests and the bishops and all, you know, cardinal. Anyhow, so I get to establish the rules. In which case, when I'm doing a presentation, if people are bright-eyed and bushy-tailed know the answers, then yes, indeed, they get chocolate. But out on the street, if I see people doing really good things, they really deserve it, then I give them some chocolate. And on the other side of that coin, frequently I see people who really, really absolutely just need something positive. And sometimes just a little something like that can make a huge difference. Yeah, I've got a lot of stories that way. But it's a neat thing, people smile. Now once in a while I get somebody that says, oh, I don't do candy. I said, no, 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 this isn't candy, this is medicine for your soul. Okay? I mean, talk to a cardiologist. Dark chocolate? Yeah, good stuff. So that's a little bit about how I got into the chocolate end of things. And nowadays I've been doing this so long, people come up to me and say, you're that chocolate guy. You know, it's like, and the rule is that I'm called Mocha Man. And so if you see me on the street anywhere, if you walk up and say Mocha Man 3 times, you get chocolate. Don't say Beetlejuice. No. Mocha Man, that works, okay? So that's what I've been doing in my spare time, and it's really enjoyable. In fact, one day I was walking out there, and on my trail, we've got an extensive trail system in Fayetteville, and saw a guy walk along. His hair was about the color of mine, and started chit-chatting. He's a retired Presbyterian minister, but he was a chaplain, Army chaplain, in Vietnam in 67, 68. Interesting guy. And I said, well, you probably have some memories that you don't really want to remember. And he said, well, there's a lot of them. He said, but there's some of them you really have to remember. And he was out in Vietnam one day, and his boss called him over and said, we need you to run up to the fire base on top of the hill, because we got a VIP up there and we need to get him. He's up there with his wife, and he's visiting the troops, but things are not going well. And so go ahead, bring them back down. We've got a chopper coming in to pick them up. So he started, he said, well, who is it? Somebody says, Jimmy Stewart. Now, does that ring any bells?
Yeah.
What did he fly in World War II?
B-24s, I think, or 7. I forget if it's a 17.
Anybody else? See, he
24.
knows the answer, but he didn't raise his hand, so he doesn't get more chocolate. So I have to, you know, we play by the rules here. Yeah, he flew B-24s, got 2 DFCs, and so here he is up there on a hill in Vietnam. At that point, he was a brigadier general in the Air Force Reserve. And so the chaplain goes trooping up the top of the hill and finds him. He's kind of tall, and reports in, sir, I knew we need to go back. You know, it's getting bad, so you need to come with me. And Jimmy Stewart said, well, you know, I kind of promised these boys that I'd come up and talk to them. And then the chaplain interrupted his own story and says, Jimmy Stewart didn't talk very fast. He was just, he said, if you do me a favor, if you just escort my wife down to the helipad, I'll be right along. And so, you know, whatever, okay, let's do what the general says. So he started to go down there, and Jimmy Stewart's wife came over to the chaplain and reached out like she was going to shake his hand, and then realized she was going to give him a hug. And she did. She came in and put her hand behind his back, and he raised his hand up over her shoulder, and they did the contact. And the chaplain says, she was beautiful. She was really beautiful. And we took a couple of steps, and then she said, Chaplain, how long has it been since you've had a shower? He said, that took the wind out of my sails. He said, here I met the most important person I ever met, and my personal hero, and I grossed out his wife. You know, just kind of like, well, we'll put on some deodorant, I guess. But truth be told, they didn't want you to wear deodorant in that part of the world, because then that makes you smell some completely different than the flora and fauna. And he obviously didn't, yeah, but anyhow. So, C-47s, has anybody ever flown these?
Yes.
Yeah. When did you fly that?
You flew
Well, I bought. We had a lot of them come in to have their wings all redone and everything, have all the
Okay.
rivets knocked out of them and upgrade the radio equipment.
Well, the last one of these that was manufactured was in 1947,
Yeah.
which incidentally rings a bell for me. We'll get into that in just a second. But we had the orientation flight going from Cheyenne to Travis Air Force Base. We had about 15 basically we were air cadets or ROTC cadets, works. So they were taking turns putting some of our compatriots up in the co-pilot seat and letting them fly the airplane a little bit. Okay, sounds pretty neat. My roommate at the time, his dad was a Cessna dealer. He sold airplanes, and so my roommate had vision that was not acceptable to the Air Force, so he couldn't be a pilot. But he was flying Cessnas. So, you know, he was holding it over us because we hadn't gotten to fly yet. We were getting there. So he's in the seat, and he is flying the plane. The pilot and the instructor's in the other seat. And have any of you heard of the term center of gravity?
Yes.
Well, what you can do, because the pilot who was not in the seat, he came back and said, okay, everybody get out of your seat. And all 15 of us wandered to the back of the airplane, weighing the nose up and the tail down, and so the plane is climbing. And the pilot in the cockpit next to our student, he was he was in on it, he knew what was going on, and he was giving our student pilot in there a whole lot of grief. Instructors do that now and then, is that right? Yeah, okay. So why can't you keep this level? Come on, trim it up, and so he's fighting, trying to get, because there's a big trim wheel that he's working with, trying to get the plane to level out, and it just, so he finally gets it trimmed, and then we all walk to the front of the airplane. Down we go. And so the instructor is giving him, it was really kind of humorous at the time. He was upset about it later, but you can have a lot of fun, and these silly airplanes are still out there flying today. They did a heck of a job in these, in the early 1930s when they put them together. So yeah. Aviation history is something else. Okay, I have a quote for you. This is a little revival meeting. And I'll be speaking to you from the book of Slipping the Surly Bonds. You can turn to the right page in the hymnal. No. Anyhow, this quote, and this is worth chocolate, it's a wonderful thing to climb the liquid mountains of the sky. Behind me and before me in God, and I have no fears. I'll give you a hint, it's not a guy.
Amelia Earhart.
Close, but no banana. Thick.
Beryl Markham.
She had trouble, a lot of trouble in her life, but managed to overcome. Let me see, her first name was Helen?
Keller.
Yep, Helen Keller. Yep. I find that kind of interesting. This book that I'm quoting from has more neat aviation quotes than you can shake a little stick at. Let me see. Now, as soon as we left the ground, I knew myself I had to fly.
Oh, that's Amelia Earhart?
Yeah, that's Amelia Earhart. Yep. Now, you know, when she did her flight, it was sort of interesting when she went across and landed in Paris. She didn't fly it. She was just in the back seat. But she was the first one out of the airplane. And the news media went kind of crazy. Wow, female pilot. Okay. Chuck Yeager mentioned his quote, very short, "I've had a ball." Now this is one I'm going to guess here. Have many of you ever read a book about a seagull? Highly recommend it. This is called, the title of the book is Jonathan Livingston Seagull. And it's a story about a seagull, your basic seagull, but he feels like he's a little different. It's written by a guy by the name of Richard Bach. And he's written quite a few really, really good novels about flying. One of them, Stranger to the Ground. Really kind of a neat thing, and Jonathan Livingston Seagull learns how to fly, but he learns how to fly faster and faster, and for those of us that got to do that, makes sense. I started out in the world of aviation at the age of 2. I was born in Houston, a little place you might have heard of, in the same hospital with Kenny Rogers, so I know how to hold them and when to fold them and when to walk away and run and that sort of thing. And lady, yeah, anyhow, so that part. But when you're a baby and all the nurses are clustered around the bassinet with the baby in there with a silver beard, the rest of us got no respect. I tell you what, laying there, a binky, a bottle, new blanket, something, but you know, they're listening to all this stuff. Anyhow. Well, I got to talk about this guy just a little bit. And when I do presentations, which I get to do a lot of these with kids, we do a program called Young Eagles, and I teach a class to the Young Eagles. They're age 8 through 17, and they get to go fly for free. We have pilots that donate their time and money, and we make that happen. Over 2.3 million people, young people, have gotten to fly. For that reason, it really opens the doors up. But we talk about how the Wright brothers came up with this airplane. How did they do that? Why did they do it? And the basic concept was they just wanted to fly. They didn't know they were going to do anything really spectacular. They didn't know they were going to make a lot of money. But they came up with this, and I point out with the kids that I asked if any of them ever had a bicycle, and so they all say yeah. And so I said, well, you had a piece of aerospace equipment, because that's what the Wright brothers did. They built bicycles, they maintained bicycles, and they had a maintenance guy, Charles, they called him Chuck, and he was there. They had decided they could throw gliders, they could make gliders work. They built full-size gliders where they could pull it up in the air and it would work sort of and back down, but they needed what? They needed a little black box right down here. Compliments of, who knows where that black box came from? The engine. 4-cylinder. 1903. Where would you go to get an engine?
Ford dealership.
What?
Ford.
Automobile.
You get some chocolate.
Ford.
I didn't
Wow.
raise my hand though.
Well, okay, we'll put this in reserve for the next time. Okay, so they got it from Ford, but it weighed a ton. It was really heavy and, you know, cast iron. So they got their bicycle guy out there, and he drilled it out, cut the weight down, and got them an extra 1 or 2 horsepower. And so then they got out there and they got this thing going, and okay, who remembers the date?
December 17, 1903.
Okay, he's
Wow.
gonna get, I'm sorry, but we had to, but there's more. Okay, so December 17th, now they picked the place basically called Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. It's on the beach. Now, why did they pick that location? There's 2 reasons.
Wind in the flat grassy area.
Okay, okay, well, flat and drafty. Okay, now, did you raise your hand? Yeah, all right. Okay, well, keep an eye on that. Okay, so they did it because there was a consistent wind coming in off the ocean. That was handy. They did it also because there were no trees. They didn't want to run into a tree. And so they got the thing airborne. First flight. Now, if you think about that airplane, and think about the airplane that I flew that was designed in the 1950s, early 50s, if the Wright brothers had their airplane and they mounted it up here on this wingtip, their first flight would take them as far as, the other wingtip. That was all it was. They did more later, and that was good. So when I'm talking with the kids, we walk right out of the hangar and walk right by a C-130, and we talk about, what about that? And that makes it a little more believable. And that's the thing that I've seen on a number of occasions, and that is that what we in the world of aerospace have done and we're normalized with, and this was something that we knew we wanted to do, trying to translate that to people who are not aviation oriented is a challenge. And that was one of the reasons we came up with the concept of the Young Eagles. There's a bunch of us in the Experimental Aircraft Association back in the 1990s, early 90s, got together and we realized that we were mostly balding eagles and we needed new young eagles. And so that's what we did. We put that together so that we could do that. And we're up over 2.3 million now, so come on in. And you are?
Joe Gowling.
Joe, good to
Yes.
see you.
You too.
Just busy talking about Young Eagles here just a smidge.
I'm going to be flying on Saturday.
Talk more of that. Oh, you are going to do some?
Glen
Okay.
Water's having a Young Eagles program on Saturday.
Yeah. Well, Saturday, and in case you're wondering, Saturday is the annual Young Eagle Fly Day. So we're trying, across the nation, we're trying to get as many young people airborne as possible. Which, considering the weather now and then, it's a handful. Because when we go fly, we want it to be positive, okay? Having the plane or the kid blown away is not good. Turbulence, it's just, we don't want them filling up barf bags. But when they get out of the airplane, and I was gonna save this for later, but I've been teaching these classes to kids before they go out. So we talk about how the planes work, what to expect, safety rules. Then we pair them up with a pilot. He or she will take them to the airplane, they go fly. So when I get finished with a class, and I'll ask, anybody out here want to be a pilot? And generally, quite a few hands go up. I had one little guy in the front row that people raised their hands. He raised a clenched fist. And I thought, okay, 9 years old. I said, what kind of pilot do you want to be? Do you want to be a recreational pilot or an airline pilot, military pilot? He got on his best Clint Eastwood, looked me square in the eye and says, I'm going to be a fighter pilot.
No.
Yeah. And I mean, Clint Eastwood would have been proud. Okay? And I said, well, are you going to go into the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines? And he says, I don't care. I'm going to be a fighter pilot. And I thought, ooh, okay. So he went out and flew. And my favorite thing to do is get right in their face after they've flown. Most all of them have never flown before. They've been there, they've had the class, they love it, they're enjoying, they're interested, and now they're going out to actually get in the plane and fly. From an education standpoint, you got the motivation going, right? You got their attention, and now you're taking them out of the box, way out of the box. Now they get to feel it. We talk about G-forces, we talk about all these things. And this little guy, after he got out of the airplane, I said, how was it? I didn't ask him if he liked it. That's a yes or no, right? So I said, how was it? And there was a little purple smoke curling out of his ears, and he says, well, it wasn't good. He says it wasn't great. He said, it was the best. I had these two little quivering thumbs up. And when he was looking at me, dive. The point came to mind that I think that little guy is really, really going to do it. Okay? We had a 17-year-old girl. Anybody know a 17-year-old girl? Have you ever heard of them? Yeah. Well,
I remember.
17-year-old girls are very, very, very cool. Nothing rattles them. Okay? So we had one of those girls in the class. Understand the class, maybe this size. We got 8-year-olds, 9, 10, 11, 12, and she's a 17-year-old. And so I've asked if people want to be a pilot, and a lot of hands went up. She didn't. She just sitting back there. I'm cool. Okay. So The kids went out, got in line, I said, are you gonna be okay with this? Because, you know, you don't have to fly if you don't want to. It's all right. And she says, I'll be okay. Okay. So she went out there and she flew. And I got in her face right after she landed. And it was virtual staccato. She was spitting out sentence fragments so fast. I mean, it was so, when we had, and the noise, and the runway was bumping, and then it was smooth, and you know, just like she was going 90 miles an hour. What she didn't see, I'm talking to her, and then behind her, her mother is walking up. And her mother just stopped behind her and stood there. She had her mouth wide open, and the girl had to go in and get her certificate. Anyhow, the mother came up and touched my arm and said, thank you. That's the most I've heard out of her in about 3 years. I mean, it was just like, it was, yeah. And so there's that personal side of aviation that gets people really connected. And it did with her. And I went inside there, and we have certificates. At the time, Harrison Ford was our director. How long have you been in the program?
2 years.
Okay.
2 years.
Well, Harrison Ford, well, yeah, I got to work for Indiana Jones and, you know, and all that stuff. Really nice guy. He has some weird tendencies toward landing on golf courses, but we don't hold that. But basic concept is he was there. And we got the certificate for her, and they were about to walk out the door, and I went over and I said, and I just had to mess with her a little bit more. And her mom was with her, and so I said, so what did you think was the best part? And because she was back to being cool again. Okay. And then she said, I just loved the takeoff. It was just going so fast, you know, and then it got, you know, bumped, you know, it was smoother, and then it just like leaving. I felt a little bit of the, you know, and her mother was cracking up behind her. I mean, it does that. It does that to people. You know, anybody that flies any disagreement, you know, it's a good thing. So the basic concept is that's neat. Now, at that same, we had have you heard of Oshkosh? I know several of you probably have. Back in 2008, I was there. I brought my tent, because the last minute thing, I had to do it last minute, so I joined 100,000 of my friends at the campground. Okay? So the concept is, camped out there, and they had a meeting for all of us in the Young Eagle program. And they kept saying, I wanted to know where it was, because I was walking, and you know, there's a lot of walking. So we asked them, and they said, no, you have to come down the flight line, and we'll get you on a trolley, and we'll take you to the meetings. And so what we didn't know was that was because that Harrison Ford was going to be there, and they didn't want all the rest of the people to know about it. And so we all sat down in our meetings, and then he walked in. We had 4 different groups, and he walked into each group, sat down and talked with us, just like your average everyday friend, and but seriously interested in helicopters and airplanes, and really enjoyable. So we got through that part, went outside. There's a picture. We're going to get a picture with him. There's about 80 or 90 of us all together from all over the country. So we're all out there getting ready to get the photographer, and I got the cherry picker, and he's going to get up and get a big group picture. So in the meantime, he's signing autographs. And one woman, we'll call her Connie, she walked up to him. She said, Mr. Ford, I don't really want an autograph. I just want a kiss. And she told me later that she was working up to this because she figured that he was just going to say, no, I can't do that. But he's evidently been in a movie or two. And so when he said that, he slid his chair back and said, oh, baby, and grabbed her by the shoulders and tilted her back about 10 degrees, maybe 15. Anyhow, and smooched her on the lips for about 3 to 5 seconds. Could have been 30 to 50 minutes. We don't know. And it was a good thing that he had her shoulders because her knees went into high-pitched oscillations. It was just wild. And so she got that, and then he finished signing and everything. And then we had to get box lunches, and so we're standing there in line, and she's over under a tree doing what I call projectile sighing. She says, and I said, are you gonna be okay? You know, looked like some kind of anxiety onset, I don't know. And she said, oh, I'll be okay. And I said, well, you know, we have lunch. And he says, yeah, it's fine. He says, my friend, we'll call her Betty, she's gonna kill me. She came from North or South Carolina. But anyhow, her friend absolutely worshipped everything that Harrison Ford did, and would have been there as well, but couldn't because of a family thing. And then the woman that got kissed, she you know, like, yeah, he's okay. But she said, when I get back, she's going to kill me, because everybody was there and everybody saw it. So yeah, interesting times there. Okay. Not everything goes as planned. And some of you have seen these pictures over here. Let me see if this will decide to work with us. No, I don't think so. Does it need to be tweaked?
I got you. I just went to sleep. We're gonna wake back up.
Well, I can tell I've got them riveted. I've spared no expense here. This was a headset I was wearing one day. I did not take it off, I ran out from under it. This was on September the 30th, 1974, at about 10:37 in the morning on the island of Okinawa at Kadena Air Base. I'll just lay this over here. We had one of those things that happened. Now, if you look at the picture here, this propeller should be right here, but it's not. Figured that out right away. The one that should be here is now way back over there. And what happened was we were doing a training flight, and we had a co-pilot, high-time co-pilot in the right seat. And he was making a landing, but we were doing what we did at that time. Anybody multi-engine qualified, 4-engine? Okay, well, one of the things we would do is we would simulate a single engine or a twin engine landing. Basically, you'd pull the throttles back on one wing or the other and just cut them all the way back, and then you use the other throttles to fly the plane. But when you do that, you do a no-flap landing because the flaps create drag. So you wind up having to land going pretty fast. Pretty fast, instead of maybe touching down at 100 knots, to be touching down at 140. So that's different. So we touch down. Okay, this is the middle of the runway right here. Co-pilot in the right seat, and he kind of touched down on the right side of the runway. And the plane starts correcting to the center. The check pilot and instructor in the left seat says, okay. Then it corrects into the middle of the left side of the runway. And this is happening in about 4 seconds. And at which point the instructor pilot grabbed the controls, said, I got the airplane, and he dropped that right wing down. He tried to fly the plane back onto the runway. He had nose wheel steering going to the right, skid marks, braking, trying to get it back on the runway. And this propeller on this wing hit the runway about 16 times. Just chop, 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 which sounds bad, but on the other hand, that was good. Because when it came off, what we found was this was the case of, and you hear this, one of the astronauts' prayers. You know, oh Lord, don't let me screw this up. That's a prayer officially. Also, there was another comment or two about how does it feel, we're going to go to the moon, flying in something that was the best bidder concept, it was the lowest bidder to make this spacecraft. That's what happened. One of the devices, when they took the engine off the last time, when they put it back on, they missed a piece. It's called safety wire. That connected the pieces of the throttle cable together, and it through the vibration with the safety wire in there, it would keep the turnbuckles from unscrewing themselves. Without the safety wire, they could eventually back off and separate it. So the throttle coordinator on the number 4 engine thought, okay, I got all this extra power now, I'm going to go to full power, with the other 3 at idle. And that's when it took us off the side of the runway. Now, the fact that propeller came off was good, because that was pushing us, and there were 3 other C-130s parked that we would have run into at about 100 miles an hour. That would not, so when I say I'm glad to be here tonight, yes, glad. Because that propeller came off, we were then able to parallel the runway as we went along, and then we hit a hill, and that's sort of when things went bad. We hit the hill, the nose gear strut came up through the flight deck floor, right behind the flight engineer, along with flames. In the nose gear of the airplane, we have a 25-liter liquid oxygen converter, and 25 liters of liquid oxygen under pressure, and we have hydraulic fluid in there, 1,500 and 3,000 psi hydraulic fluid being ripped about and spurting, and a little bitty spark, and we had flames up in the cockpit. I was sitting in the navigator's seat at the time, and we let the navigator off, and it broke right beside me, and I got toasted on my left side. We had another aircraft commander sitting on the crew bunk, and it broke right in front of him, so he got cooked on the front part of him. Basically, the rules say you're supposed to stay in position until the last impact. And we thought, no, we're cooking back here. So we got out of our seats and went up. I held onto the co-pilot seat, and the other pilots held onto the pilot seat until we finally came to a stop. We tore off the right main landing gear. The props were gone. The engines were burning on the right wing. The external tank on the right wing was burning, and we had a fire in the cockpit and going back into the back end of the airplane. So things were, no, we got an excellent response from the fire department, because we almost put it into the fire department. And they didn't have to answer the crash phone. It was like, checker's game is over, and for the younger people I have to tell them, it's not digital. It's a little card and you have these pieces. Anyhow, they responded rather rapidly. They got out there, and at that point, we all jumped out the windows. The co-pilot and I went out this window right here. There's no rope, there's no ladder, and I remember looking at my head, just sticking my body out there and thinking, black smoke, can't see anything. I could hurt myself. I could break my neck, break a leg, break an arm, whatever. But have you ever heard of the term toasted bugs? We had no mixed flight suits on, you know, fireproof, but they transfer heat real well. And so I thought that I don't want to do that, and so I jumped out and wound up getting a significant bruise on my leg, hitting a pitot tube as I slithered out, whatever. I was the last one out of the airplane. That got my attention. I can talk about that particular event and the safety side of things for a long time. Flight safety wise, I was trained by the University of California and became an aircraft accident investigator and prevention specialist. I could go out and look at the smoking hole in a cornfield, or later on I flew C-9 medevacs, or DC-930 series. So it's like some people like whodunit stories, and for me this was the ultimate whodunit, because whatever you did would make a difference as to whether somebody was going to survive it or not. Now, as to how hot the fire was, it was pretty warm. If you can look right up here, you'll see a little bit of an indentation there. Let me see if my class on how to run this works. Okay, we're making progress. Oh, that's weird. Well, I might need some help on that. I'm getting flowers.
We don't need flowers.
I don't need flowers. It's good to have technical expertise.
Okay, which
Oh,
one you
there
want
we
next?
go, this one.
Pulling up for me.
Oh, that looks cool.
It's just not pulling up big. If we got something going on with it, we'll figure it out.
Well, that's what,
I'll figure it out. You keep talking, I got it.
I'll use my backup training aid. This is from the other side, and you'll see a big indentation here in the fuselage of the airplane. That's because the fire was burning in excess of 2,000 degrees, which melted the body of the airplane, which
There it is.
we had no people on board. Oh, thank you. Basic concept is routinely firefighters will go in this side right here to gain access to get into the airplane. That's where the crew entrance door is located. And I knew that we had everybody out. And I had to grab one of the firefighters by his aluminum suspenders and say, don't go in. Because if they would have gone in with their fancy suits, that would have been just a nice place to put the remains. So yeah, we all got out of that, and the guy that was sitting on the crew bunk, he got back on a flight status within about a month. And I was flying the next week. And they still had the skid marks on the runway, and the airplane was still laying in a big pile there. And trust me, when we made the approaches and landing, we were watching the instruments very carefully. They did go back and find out the people that did the work on the airplane were out of business. They did one lowest bidder repair too many. I'll put it that way. So we pay attention to that kind of thing. Safety-wise, when I was in pilot school, my first day there, we showed up at the office and waiting there and see a big column of black smoke, and one of these little airplanes had gotten airborne, and all of a sudden they said, "You're on fire, eject." Who might know what this is?
T-34?
Close.
Oh, gee.
We called it the Tweed.
Oh,
Okay.
T-37.
T-37. We also called it a subsonic dog whistle. It had the loudest engines of any airplane that we flew. If you were an instructor pilot in this airplane, they would only let you do it for 2 years. After that, they were finding too much noise damage, hearing loss. But it was a fun plane to fly. But when we were, that first day there, all of a sudden got airborne, he's got a fire, he ejected, he got one swing out of his parachute and walked away. And we had 2 of them in the traffic pattern, one flying high, one flying here, and came right up under it and killed the 2 in the bottom airplane. The 2 in the top ejected. One made it, one didn't. We had another student who thought he knew more than that, and so he had mounted a video camera on, well, not video, a movie camera back in those days, on the glare shield so he could take movies. And he was down doing a low level, way too low, and came up over a ridge and caught the right wingtip and rolled it in. We had one more. Anybody know about birds?
Oh, yeah.
We had one of our Texas pilots was out flying. The student pilot had 3 flights in the airplane, and he had an instructor with him. Hit a vulture, came right through and killed the instructor. Tore the cockpit open, and blood and feathers and everything, and the student had the wherewithal to fly it back and land it. He got some awards out of that. But airplanes are, they do have limitations on occasion. I do have to show you briefly another thing in my little bag of tricks here. When I say it was kind of a shaky landing, this was my little outfit. And it, you know, it looks pretty good.
Looks like it got a
Let's see
little
here,
hot.
you're gonna hold that for me for just a second. This is a Crew 60P connector. Okay, there, now we're connected. So, I left this in the airplane too, I didn't bring it with me. But the interesting part is, the thing still works. It went through that fire and really did an amazing job. But made you feel better about the equipment that you had, other than the airplane itself. Okay, that's enough of that. Okay, that's what you're supposed to look like. Okay? Come to think of it, my hair has changed color, and there's more of it. Whatever, I just had to show you that picture. Now, let's see if it's going to participate. Now, after you've had one mission too many, this is what you wind up looking like. It just, you know, that guy was a janitor in one of the fighter squadrons in Germany. We put him in the wing commander's outfit and thought that looked good. Now, other people, when they graduated from college, became accountants. They became, shall we say, let's see, advertisers, marketing. They had nice desks. This was my desk 6 months after I graduated from the University of Wyoming. If you ever saw that first movie called Top Gun, they used these and the fighter version of this called the F-5 in the movie because they could not computer generate any of that stuff. So they used real airplanes, but they took these and painted them black and put red stars on them. Okay, fine. Now, this is a T-38. Now, the Wright brothers, bouncing back to when they were doing this, in 1902, alrighty, 1902, Orville said, this is way too hard. We're trying to create a powered, controlled airplane. It's going to take us another 50 years. Well, the next year, you know, history, okay? So, 50 years after that, we had these airplanes flying. This airplane was being designed. The C-130 was being designed, and I flew one of these models that was a 1956 model.
That's what I got.
That was the first year. What was that?
My plane's in 1956.
Oh, okay. Well, it was a good year.
It was a very good year.
Now, the one that I flew was one of those flights that you do out in the middle of nowhere. Nobody knows you're there. And so instead of having wing tanks on here, we had drones. We had remotely piloted drones hanging on the wings, 2 on each wing, on the A models. And we used those, and here's the interesting part about all that, is that according to the guidance here, it says here something about the first pilotless vehicles were developed in Britain, etc., and so on. Then it says, we go forward to the 1970s, saw other countries outside of Britain and the U.S. to begin explore unmanned aerial technology. Okay, so in the 60s, we were launching drones off of these airplanes. In the 70s, we were launching them we were based in Thailand, and we would send the drones up over North Vietnam. And that way, if one of the drones got shot down, we didn't lose a pilot. And pilots agreed, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
We don't want to lose a pilot. We were even experimenting with weapons delivery. We blew up some things in Utah, technically mostly rocks and dirt. There's occasionally a sheep or two that were, but anyhow, the airplane was used for all sorts of things, and that was one of the things we liked about it. We did all sorts of high altitude, low altitude, lots of airdrops. Biggest thing I ever airdropped out of this was a road grader. It weighed 37,000 pounds. We used 3 100-foot parachutes to yank it out the back of the airplane. And earlier we talked about the concept of weight and balance, center of gravity.
Oh, yeah.
When you got 37,000 pounds going rapidly that way, the nose wants to go up. Both pilots in the cockpit, elbows locked, nose down, pushing down as hard as we can, nose down trim, trying to keep the plane, because the plane is wanting to go this way, which we don't recommend.
No, no.
But yeah, it's,
Yeah, no, that thing.
yeah, it's an interesting concept. But, so they didn't quite get that 50-year thing figured out, but one other plane that was being designed, and this is the one that I'll end up with here tonight.
SR-71.
This little puppy,
Little. He's huge.
somebody said it was an SR-71, that's right.
Yeah,
That's
SR,
the trainer.
and little is not the correct word for that, sir.
Yeah.
thing is
and, What
huge.
was it first called?
Blackbird.
Well, they called it a blackbird.
It was an A-12 at one point.
Well, well, initially it was called the YF-12A.
Oh, yeah,
That's close enough.
yeah.
Okay, YF-12A. But the F means fighter,
Yeah.
right? And so they had arranged it to where there would be missile bays in the belly of the airplane so they could open the doors and launch a missile. But there was nobody up there to shoot at. It was supposed to be over 80,000 feet, which technically means 100,000 feet in talking to people about this. Last summer I got to geek out. I was up in, well, Washington and Oregon, but down in Oregon there they have an air museum where the spruce goose is located. And if you want to talk about a big, big airplane, and they also had an SR-71 unwrapped for us. They had the engine out. We had mechanics, the aerospace technicians that worked on the engines. We had 3 pilots, and my son was with me, and luckily he was off somewhere else, so I got to hang out and talk with the SR pilots for about an hour. And I was like a kid in a candy store. These airplanes were designed, and we talk about this frequently with the kids, because a lot of the kids have got these. During one of the Young Eagles things, I was talking, anybody ever worked, you know, with around airplanes? Have you ever been, you know, what do you think about airplanes? And this little kid says, I have a question, 10-year-old. What's the climb schedule for an SR-71? Shut up. Okay, next. Now the concept is, I had just seen something about it, and this thing I saw a bunch of when I was in high school, when it was being tested at Edwards. My older brother was in the newspaper there in the Air Force, and so he'd send me 8x10 glossies of these airplanes, which I like, oh wow, really, really significant. But what's really interesting, the guy that designed these, he's designed a bunch of airplanes. Anybody have an idea?
Kelly Johnson?
Kelly Johnson. You got enough chocolate?
Yeah, I bet.
And you didn't
I didn't
raise
raise
your
my
hand,
hand.
so that's okay. So, Kelly Johnson, he designed, what else did he design?
Lockheed Starfighter, F-104 Starfighter, C-130. Gosh, I can't even think.
World War II.
Several. P-38.
P-38.
Yeah.
The F-80, or
Oh, yeah.
the
T-30.
trainer version of that became the T-33.
Yeah.
All those things, and he got up in front of his group of engineers when he was designing, had been given the task to do this, and he pulled out a $50 bill and said, this is for anybody who can design anything that's easy. And when they got through, he still had his $50. Really amazing, and the skin temperature when it's flying, And something I found out last summer, the skin temperature right here at the cutting edge, the leading part of the canopy, that cooks at about 1,000 to 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit. If you're in your air-conditioned suit inside, you put your hand up against the cockpit window, air-conditioned suit, you can hold it there for about a little less than a second before it burns through. It's cooking at 300 to 400 degrees on the side windows. Back here, 700 to 800, 900 degrees around the engines. And of course, they used to use tires, regular old tires, and they got one landing out of each set of tires. So they designed the tires, they called them B.F. Goodrich Silvertowns. They impregnated aluminum into the rubber as they made the tires. And this one was also interesting because guess what? It was still secret, and it was flying in Utah at night. And the SR pilots, or the YF-12 guys at that time, they look out there and here's the damn airliner all lit up like a Christmas tree, and like we're not supposed to be seen. So they hit the power. Now, the jet engines produce power, they do real good, but it's unique. Your jet engine exhaust, when you see the mock diamonds coming out the back of the engine, that's in a kind of a neon green color. Pretty impressive. So the airliners here, these guys see that and they whoa, they're gone. And what do these guys do?
UFO.
Yeah, it was 2 UFOs, because you could see those 2 blasts, and so they called up Salt Lake Center, and we saw a UFO up there, and they said, Roger, come in and debrief that. And so they came in, and there's a couple guys in suits. I don't know if they were men in black, but they said, let's talk over here. And so then the story came out, it was the reflection of the moon off of the clouds, and it wasn't after all. Because if they wanted to stick to their story, their flight career would be limited at best. Anyhow, in that regard, questions, anything at all that you can think of?